The desert sun shimmered across the Arizona training range, turning the rocky ridges into glowing copper teeth that bit into the horizon. Captain Eleanor Hayes's F-16 Falcon roared overhead, a streak of steel cutting through the cloudless blue. Her hands gripped the stick with the steady control of someone who had been flying long enough for instinct to take over. Every motion of the jet was an extension of her body, every vibration of the fuselage, a pulse in her veins. She wasn't just flying. She was performing. "Hayes, you're too low." Her wingman's voice crackled over the radio. Eleanor smiled inside her oxygen mask. "Relax, Collins. I know what I'm doing. Tower's not gonna like it." "They never do," she replied, eyes narrowing on the jagged canyon ahead. The official protocol required her to maintain altitude, fly clean, and stay well above the radar tracking threshold. But Eleanor hated clean lines and safe altitudes. To her, flying wasn't about regulations. It was about instinct, daring, and precision. She eased her jet lower, skimming barely 100 feet above the ground. The canyon walls closed in like a narrowing throat that every instructor she'd ever had would have barked at her to pull up. She did single quotes T dot instead. She let the Falcon dip lower. Engines echoing through the canyon, bouncing sound waves off ancient stone. The maneuver wasn't in any training manual. It wasn't necessary for the exercise. But Eleanor believed that one day, a mission would demand exactly this kind of flying slipping. Beneath enemy radar, unseen, unheard, until it was too late. And when that day came, no rulebook would save them. Only skill would. "Jesus, Hayes," Collins muttered through the comms. "You're insane." But beneath his words was admiration. Everyone in her squadron knew Eleanor was one of the best. She didn't just fly the jet, she made it dance. By the time she pulled back up and leveled off, sweat dripped down the back of her neck, but her pulse sang with triumph. She glanced at the horizon, knowing full well that somewhere in the tower, someone was furious. They always were. The debriefing room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and dust. A projection screen flickered with telemetry data, red lines marking Eleanor's altitude dips in glaring evidence. Around the table sat her commanding officer, Colonel Donovan, his jaw tight, and 3 other senior staffers whose faces carried the mixture of disapproval and exhaustion reserved for repeat offenders. Eleanor sat straight-backed, flight suit still half-sipped, hair matted from the helmet. Her expression was calm, though she could feel the storm brewing. Colonel Donovan didn't waste time. He jabbed a finger toward the screen. What the hell was that stunt? A demonstration? Eleanor answered evenly. Of what? How to get yourself killed? Of how to survive, she corrected. Sir, if we're ever in contested airspace with active radar and anti-aircraft, those maneuvers could save lives. You can't always fly textbook. Donovan's voice rose. This wasn't contested airspace. It was a training exercise over Arizona. There was no threat except you. One of the staffers chimed in. Your altitude dipped below 500 feet for nearly 90 seconds. That's a court-martial offense if someone decides to push it. Eleanor met their eyes without flinching. And yet, I never lost control. Not once. That's not the point. Donovan slammed his palm on the table. The coffee mugs rattled. You think rules are suggestions, Captain? You think because you're talented, you get to rewrite the manual? For a moment, silence hung in the air, broken only by the faint buzz of the projector. Eleanor could feel the weight of their stares pressing down, but she refused to wilt. With respect, sir, she said quietly, the manual doesn't win wars. Pilots do. By dusk, the verdict was official. She was grounded. The notice came in a formal memo, stamped and signed, but it could just as easily have been written in ash across the sky. Effective immediately, Captain Eleanor Hayes was relieved of flight duties, pending review. She was reassigned to logistics and ground operations. The humiliation cut deeper than any reprimand she'd received before. For years, flying had been her identity, her reason for rising before dawn, her solace when the world below felt too heavy. To lose it felt like losing herself. She left the office with the paper folded neatly in her pocket, her boots crunching against the gravel as the sunset bled across the tarmac. Around her, jets taxied and engines roared, the smell of kerosene thick in the air. She stood still, listening, aching, knowing she was no longer part of it. "Sorry, Hayes," Collins said quietly, approaching from behind. His expression was equal parts pity and guilt. "They're saying it's indefinite." Eleanor forced a thin smile. "Figures. They don't like pilots who make them nervous. You made us all nervous out there today. And you loved every second of it," she shot back. Collins didn't argue. He just shook his head, clapped her shoulder, and walked away. Nights became the hardest. Lying awake in the barracks, Eleanor could still feel the phantom weight of the helmet pressing against her forehead, still hear the afterburners roaring in her chest. She dreamed of flight so vividly that sometimes she woke with her arms twitching, as if reaching for controls that weren't their ground duty was salt in the wound. She now spent her days buried in spreadsheets, coordinating fuel supplies, maintenance, schedules, and parts requisitions. Important work, yes, but not hers. She was a pilot. She was supposed to be up there, not shuffling paper down here. Some whispered she'd been reckless. Others whispered she'd been scapegoated. Either way, Eleanor stayed silent. What good would arguing do? To most of the brass, she was already a liability, a name on a list of problem officers. Still, she couldn't let go of that canyon flight. She replayed it in her mind 100 times, tracing each turn, each bank, each perfect execution. Not once had she lost control. Not once had she doubted her skill. The risk had been real. Yes, but wasn't that the point? If you only practiced safe scenarios, how could you ever be ready for the dangerous ones? One afternoon, as she left the hangar with a stack of reports under her arm, she overheard two junior pilots talking by the vending machine. "Hayes could have flown circles around any of us," one said. "Yeah, but what good's talent if you don't follow orders?" The other replied. They laughed softly, unaware she could hear. Eleanor kept walking, face unreadable, but the words dug deep. To them, she wasn't a leader anymore, just a cautionary tale. Weeks passed. The world kept turning. Her squadron deployed on missions overseas, and she watched from the sidelines, tracking their movements on a screen instead of from a cockpit. Every time she signed a fuel requisition, every time she updated a maintenance log, the same thought echoed through her mind. This isn't where I'm supposed to be. And yet, what choice did she have? Orders were orders. Disobedience had consequences. She knew that better than anyone. Still, deep in her chest, the fire burned. If they thought grounding her would extinguish it, they had no idea who they were dealing with. One evening, she climbed onto the roof of the barracks, sitting cross-legged as twilight painted the desert violet. A pair of jets thundered overhead, streaking toward the horizon. Eleanor tilted her head back, following their contrails until they faded into stars. She whispered to herself, "Ground me all you want. The sky's still mine." The desert wind carried the words away, scattering them across the empty night, but in her heart, she believed them. And though she didn't know it yet, her exile from the sky was only temporary. Fate had other plans. Days bled together, one indistinguishable from the next. Morning began with the metallic buzz of the barracks alarm, followed by the shuffle of boots on concrete and the smell of burnt coffee wafting from the mess hall. Captain Eleanor Hayes had once greeted dawn with anticipation, checking flight plans, prepping gear, running last-minute simulations before taking to the sky. Now her mornings ended with her at a desk in the logistics office, eyes glazed over spreadsheets and requisition forms. She tried to convince herself the work mattered. Fuel allocations kept planes in the air. Maintenance schedules kept pilots alive. A misfiled request could ground an entire squadron. It mattered. But it wasn't flying. Eleanor would sit at her desk, the low hum of the fluorescent lights pressing against her temples, while outside, the thunder of afterburners rattled the window panes. She would glance up, catching the shadow of a falcon streaking across the Arizona sky, and her chest would ache. That should have been her. Her colleagues noticed the change in her. "Hayes, you've got the requisition numbers for Hangar 7? A young lieutenant asked one afternoon, dropping a stack of binders on her desk. She glanced up slowly. "Yeah, already sent them." The lieutenant nodded, clearly uncomfortable. No one quite knew how to treat her anymore. She was still captain. Hayes, the once celebrated pilot with a reputation for daring precision. But now she was also the grounded one, the pilot who had flown too close to the edge and been clipped for it. She was living proof of what happened when you pushed too far. Some treated her with pity, others with quiet judgment. A few avoided her altogether, as though her downfall were contagious. At night, in the mess hall, whispers followed her. She was the best we had. Yeah, but talent doesn't mean much if you can't follow orders. Still, if I were in combat, I'd want her on my wing. Eleanor pretended not to hear, pushing peas around her tray, forcing herself to swallow food that tasted like ash. The waiting was the real punishment, not the grounding itself, not the loss of her wings, though that hurt like nothing else. It was the waiting, the endless knowing monotony of being sidelined. She woke each morning with the same hollow thought. Not today. Not today would she fly. Not today would she feel the rush of the afterburner or the fierce tilt of the nose banking into a climb. Instead, she would sign off on another set of forms, confirm another maintenance report, schedule another fueling run. On the rare days she allowed herself to linger by the hangars, she watched the pilots preparing for flight. Their laughter, their nervous rituals, tapping helmets, flexing gloves, trading last-minute jabs, all of it tugged at her like a knife twisting in her chest. They were heading into the sky. She was staying behind. Sometimes she caught herself gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles turned white. The hunger to be back in the cockpit was overwhelming, visceral. But she forced herself to let go, turn away, and walk back to her desk. One evening, after another 14-hour day of paperwork, Eleanor found herself alone in the operations center. The building was dark, the others long gone, but she couldn't bring herself to leave. She sat in front of a monitor, replaying telemetry data from a recent mission dot. As she watched the jets weave their paths across the screen, she leaned forward, tracing the flight paths with her fingertip. She muttered under her breath, correcting mistakes no one else would notice. Too wide on that turn. Too slow on that descent. You should have dropped altitude here. She wasn't even aware she was talking to herself until the silence of the room pressed in again. With a sigh, she leaned back, shutting off the screen. She pressed her palms to her eyes, exhaustion tugging at her bones. The truth was simple. She was wasting away here. She could fill 100 spreadsheets, manage 1,000 fuel runs, but none of it would quiet the restless fire in her chest. She wasn't built for this. She was built for flight. The base psychologist tried to help. You need to accept your new reality, Dr. Patel told her during one of their mandatory check-ins. New reality? Eleanor scoffed. I'm a pilot. That's my reality. Always has been. Not at the moment, Patel said gently. You need to adapt. Find value in what you're doing now. Purpose doesn't vanish just because the circumstances change. Eleanor shook her head. You don't get it. Flying isn't a circumstance. It's who I am. You might as well tell me to stop breathing." The doctor's pen paused mid-note. He studied her for a long moment before writing again. "And what happens if you never fly again?" Eleanor stared at him, unblinking. "Then I'll die on the ground." Weeks turned into months. Outside the wire, the world was in chaos. Conflicts flared overseas, and squadrons were rotated in and out with increasing urgency. Eleanor tracked the missions from afar, her role reduced to shuffling numbers and ensuring supplies moved where they needed to. She followed the briefings, memorized the outcomes, but always as an outsider looking in. She sent Collins off on deployment one brisk morning, watching him strap into his Falcon with a grin. "Keep my seat warm," he teased. She forced a smile. "You know I will." When his jet lifted into the sky, Eleanor stood alone on the tarmac, staring until the afterburner glow disappeared into the clouds. At night, sleep brought no relief. Dreams pulled her back into the cockpit, back into the canyon where it had all gone wrong or right, depending on how you looked at it. She relived every bank, every roll, every breathless second skimming the earth at impossible speed. And always, just before she pulled up, she woke gasping, hands clutching invisible controls. The barracks felt suffocating, the walls closing in like a coffin. She started spending more time outside, jogging the perimeter fence at dawn, chasing the contrails overhead with her eyes. She'd run until her lungs burned, as though sheer exhaustion could quiet the hunger inside her. But it never did. The whispers never stopped. Some younger pilots idolized her still, stealing glances when she walked past, hoping for a word of encouragement. Others muttered that she was a cautionary tale, proof that arrogance always caught up with you. One afternoon, Eleanor overheard two mechanics talking in the hangar. She had it all, you know. Best damn pilot I ever saw. Yeah, but talents. No good if you can't follow orders. Maybe. Or maybe she just scared the brass too much. The word stung, but she didn't let it show. She walked past them, shoulders squared, jaw tight. Later that night, alone in her room, she let herself feel the weight of it. She buried her face in her hands, the humiliation pressing down like a physical force. She had given everything to the Air Force, her youth, her loyalty, her soul. And now she was reduced to whispers and paperwork. Still, a part of her refused to break. Every morning she tied her boots with the same precision, zipped her flight suit though she wasn't flying, and carried herself with the posture of a pilot. She refused to let them see her diminished. If the sky had been taken from her, she would hold on to her identity until her dying breath. Because deep down, Eleanor Hayes knew something no memo, no reprimand, no grounding could erase. She was a pilot. And someday, somehow, she would prove it again. She just didn't know that day was already on its way. Asterisk, the desert was alive with fire. At dawn, a convoy of armored vehicles cut through the barren expanse of sand and stone, engines growling, tires chewing through dust. Inside the lead Humvee sat General Thomas Aldridge and General Samuel Ruiz, two of the most senior officers in the region. Their mission was straightforward: inspect a forward outpost, meet with local allies, return before nightfall. Nothing about it was supposed to be dangerous. But in war zones, nothing ever goes as planned. The first explosion hit just after sunrise. A roadside IED, buried beneath the sand, detonated with a deafening roar, flipping the third vehicle in the column. Like a toy, shrapnel tore through the air. The convoy lurched to a halt. Soldiers scrambled for cover as gunfire erupted from the ridges above. Ambush! Someone shouted, voice drowned by the clatter of a K-47S. General Aldridge ducked low, his heart pounding. General Ruiz grabbed the radio handset. "We're under fire. Coordinates transmitting now." "Repeat, This is Convoy Bravo 7, taking heavy fire. Static hissed back. The signal was jammed. Damn it, Ruiz cursed, slamming the handset down. They're cutting us off. The air filled with dust, smoke, and chaos. Soldiers fired upward, returning volleys of lead as shadowy figures darting between rocks. But for every enemy that went down, 2 more seemed to appear. Within minutes, the convoy was pinned. Back at headquarters, thousands of miles away, News hit like a THUNDERCL8. Colonel Donovan paced the operations center, jaw clenched as updates flickered across satellite feeds. The room buzzed with frantic energy analysts shouting coordinates, officers scrambling to reroute drones, radios hissing with fragmented reports. 2 generals, stranded behind enemy lines. A young intelligence officer reported. Convoy, cut in half. They've lost 3 vehicles already. Minimal comes. Enemy force size unknown. Donovan slammed his fist on the table. We need an extraction plan. Now. A major spread a map across the table, pointing at the coordinates. The whole region's crawling with enemy militia. Anti-aircraft batteries, here, here, and here. Any rescue attempt will be shredded before it gets close. Helicopters? Too risky. They'll be spotted on approach. What about armored? Reinforcements? At least 6 hours out. The generals don't have 6 hours. Donovan swore under his breath. The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of the problem settling in like sand, filling a grave. Meanwhile, in the desert, the convoy fought to stay alive. Rounds pinged off steel, sending sparks across the scorched ground. Soldiers crouched. Behind burning vehicles, rifles clutched tight, sweat streaking their dirt-caked faces. The heat was merciless, the sun glaring down like a cruel overseer. General Aldridge tried to keep his voice steady as he ducked behind cover. Status? A young lieutenant crawled over, face streaked with blood. We're pinned, sir. Ammunitions. Low. They're trying to flank us. Casualties? The lieutenant hesitated. Too many. Aldridge closed his eyes briefly. He was no stranger to combat, but being trapped without air support felt like a slow death sentence. He exchanged a grim look with Ruiz. Both men understood the gravity. If they were captured, it wouldn't just be their lives at stake. Classified intel, strategic credibility, morale, all of it would crumble. At headquarters, desperation mounted. We can't just sit on our hands, Donovan barked. There has to be a way in. A flight commander stepped forward hesitantly. There is one, but it's not standard procedure. The room turned toward him. The only way to reach them quickly is low-altitude insertion. Hug the terrain. Weave through the canyons. Avoid radar. It's high risk. Most pilots won't attempt it. Donovan's eyes narrowed. He knew what that meant. Everyone did. The words hung unspoken in the air. The only pilot who had mastered that kind of flying was grounded. In the convoy. The minutes stretched like hours. Ammunition ran dry in one vehicle. A medic dragged a wounded sergeant into the shade of a Humvee. Hands slick with blood. Enemy fire grew bolder, closing in tighter. Sir, a soldier shouted, pointing toward the ridgeline. A cluster of enemy trucks appeared, reinforcements moving fast. General Ruiz clenched his jaw. If we don't get out soon, we won't get out at all. He picked up the damaged radio, trying again, his voice strained. This is Bravo 7, requesting immediate extraction. If anyone hears this, we need air support now. Static. And then, faintly, a broken signal. Copy. Coordinates. Hold on. It wasn't much, but it was hope. Ruiz closed his eyes briefly. Just hold out a little longer. At HQ, the debate intensified. Sir, we can't risk it, one major argued. If we send an aircraft through that corridor, we're sending them to die. And if we don't, Donovan snapped. 2 generals are captured. Do you want that on your record? Do you want to explain that to Washington? The major fell silent. The room pulsed with tension, the stakes too high to ignore. Someone finally voiced what everyone was thinking. There's only one pilot reckless enough to pull this off. All eyes turned toward the corner of the room, where Eleanor Hayes sat silently at a desk, reviewing maintenance logs. She hadn't spoken a word all morning, hadn't even looked up when the crisis began. But she felt the weight of their stares now, pressing into her like gravity. Donovan's. Lips thinned. She's grounded. Grounded or not, someone muttered. She's their only shot. In the desert, the firefight raged on. Smoke blackened the sky, mingling with the stench of burning fuel and scorched metal. Soldiers shouted over the din, rifles cracking until the magazines clicked empty. The enemy pressed closer, their shouts echoing off the cliffs. General Aldridge crouched low, clutching his side where a shard of shrapnel had torn through his uniform. He was bleeding, but not enough to stop him. He locked eyes with Ruiz. If someone doesn't come soon. Aldridge began. They'll come, Ruiz interrupted. His tone was steady, but his eyes betrayed the doubt, because deep down, both men knew the truth. If a miracle didn't happen in the next hour, they were finished, and miracles were in short. Supply dot back in Arizona, Eleanor Hayes lifted her eyes from the paperwork, her jaw set. She hadn't been invited into the conversation, but she didn't need an invitation. She could read the situation on every tense face in the room. She knew what was being asked without words. She knew why they were looking at her dot, and though her wings had been clipped, though her pride still ached from the grounding, she felt something stir in her chest, something she hadn't felt in months. The sky was calling again. Night settled over the Arizona base like a heavy cloak. The desert was silent, except for the occasional gust of wind rattling loose gravel against the barracks walls. Inside, the corridors were dim, most of the personnel either asleep or out on rotation. For Captain Eleanor Hayes, the silence felt oppressive. She sat on the edge of her narrow bunk, flight suit unzipped, boots kicked off to the side. A half-written letter lay on her desk, the words scrawled but unfinished. She'd started writing it to her father, trying to explain why she hadn't flown in months, but halfway through she'd crumpled the page in frustration. How could she explain something she didn't fully understand herself? Her phone buzzed at. First she ignored it, assuming it was another reminder about paperwork waiting in the logistics office. But then it buzzed again, 3 sharp vibrations in quick succession. Secure line. Not the kind of call you ignored, Dot. She picked it up. Hayes. Static filled her ear, followed by a clipped voice. Captain Hayes, stand by. You're being patched through. The line clicked, then another voice, low and urgent. Captain, this is General Ruiz. Eleanor sat bolt upright. Sir, listen carefully. I don't have much time. We're pinned behind enemy lines. Communications are unstable, but we've managed to get through. We need immediate extraction. We need you. For a moment, Eleanor thought she'd misheard. Her throat went dry. Sir, with all respect, I'm grounded. I'm not authorized to fly. Ruiz's voice sharpened. Authorization be damned. We've reviewed every option. None of them will get us out alive. You're the only pilot with the skills to do what's needed. Low altitude insertion. Risky flying. You know the kind. Her heart pounded against her ribs. The irony cut deep. The very style that had branded her reckless was now being sought out by the highest command in the field. General Aldridge's voice broke in, faint but firm. Hayes, we're out of time. If you don't come, we won't make it. That's not speculation, that's fact. You know what's at stake. Eleanor stared at the floor, her pulse thundering in her ears. 2 generals, lives of the convoy, classified intelligence. If they fell into enemy hands, the damage would ripple across continents. And they were asking her. But the other voice, in her mind, whispered louder. Orders, regulations, consequences. She didn't sleep. Instead, she paced the length of her barracks room until dawn painted the horizon in shades of copper and pink. Her thoughts were a storm, colliding, clashing, looping back. She could already imagine Donovan's face, the fury in his eyes, if she so much as touched a cockpit. But then she remembered Ruiz's voice, strained yet steady, and Aldridge's words, "If you don't come, we won't make it by morning." The decision weighed so heavily, it felt carved into her bones. The operations center was chaos. Screens flickered with satellite images of the desert battlefield. Analysts barked updates. Commanders argued strategies. The entire room vibrating with urgency. Eleanor slipped in quietly, blending into the flurry of uniforms. She didn't speak, just watched. Colonel Donovan stood at the center, jaw tight, arms folded. "We've considered every approach. Nothing works. Reinforcements won't arrive in time." "What about air support?" an officer asked. "Too dangerous. The canyon routes are suicide. No pilot could thread them without being spotted or shot down." Eleanor's voice cut through the room before she realized she'd spoken. Yes, they could. The room fell silent. Heads turned. Donovan's glare was instant, sharp enough to cut steel. "Captain Hayes," he said coldly, "you are not part of this discussion." "They requested me, sir." Her voice was steady, though her heart raced. Donovan's eyes narrowed. "You're grounded for reckless flying, and now you're volunteering to fly the most reckless mission we've ever faced?" "Yes, sir." Murmurs rippled through the room. Some were incredulous. Others sounded hopeful. Donovan stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "This isn't a game, Hayes. If you fail, 2 generals die. Do you understand that?" She held his gaze. "If I don't try, they die anyway." For a moment, Donovan just stared at her, his jaw working. Then he turned away, barking to the room. "This discussion is over." But Eleanor saw it in the eyes of the other officers. The seed of doubt. The flicker of belief. They knew she was right. That evening, she found herself standing in the shadow of the hangar, staring at the sleek silhouette of the Falcon. The jet seemed to glow under the floodlights, every line of its frame sharp and familiar. Her body ached. To be inside it again, to feel the controls in her hands. The sky rushing past her canopy. Her wingman Collins approached quietly. "You thinking what I think you're thinking?" She didn't answer. He studied her, then shook his head. "They'll court-martial you if you disobey." "Maybe," she said. "Then why risk it?" Eleanor finally turned to him, her eyes fierce. "Because if I don't, they're dead. And if I let that happen while I sit here pushing papers, then I don't deserve these wings anyway." Collins held her gaze for a long moment. Then, without a word, he pressed her helmet into her hands. Her breath caught. "Damn it. Hayes," he muttered. "If anyone can do this, it's you." The helmet was heavy in her grip, the familiar weight sending a shiver down her spine. She slid her fingers across the visor, remembering every mission, every reckless maneuver, every victory earned at impossible odds. She closed her eyes and whispered, "One last chance." And in that moment, she knew. The call wasn't just from the generals. It was from the sky itself. The hangar buzzed with the sound of engines idling, the metallic clang of tools against steel, the low murmur of pilots and mechanics preparing for the night sortie. Fluorescent lights cast long shadows across the polished floor where rows of falcons gleamed under the hum of electricity. Captain Eleanor Hayes stood at the edge of it all, helmet tucked under her arm. The familiar scent of jet fuel filled her lungs. It was intoxicating, both a reminder of everything she had lost and everything she might reclaim. "Colonel," Donovan's words echoed in her mind. "You are not part of this discussion. This is over." But she knew it wasn't over. Not for her. The general's voices still rang in her ears. "If you don't come, we won't make it." Word of the crisis spread quickly across the squadron. Pilots whispered in corners, casting furtive glances at Eleanor as she walked past. Everyone knew she was the only one reckless or skilled enough to attempt a canyon run extraction. That afternoon, Donovan gathered the squadron in the briefing room. His face was stone, his voice sharp. "Let me make this clear. No one is authorized to attempt low-altitude insertion. It's a suicide mission. We'll find another solution." The room was silent. Pilots exchanged uneasy glances. They all knew there was no other solution. The generals were running out of time. Eleanor sat in the back, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the floor. She could feel the weight of every gaze, the unspoken plea in the air. But Donovan's authority was absolute, at least on paper. When the meeting ended, she rose to leave, but a hand caught her arm. It was Collins. "Don't do anything stupid," he whispered. "Stupid?" She shot back quietly. "Or necessary." His jaw tightened. "You'll ruin your career. They'll strip your wings for good." She leaned closer. "Collins, if I let them die out there while I sit here, then maybe I don't deserve these wings." He didn't argue. He just stared at her for a long moment, then pressed a folded map into her hand. "If you're going to do it," he muttered, "take the canyon route west. It's narrow, but it'll keep you off radar." Her chest tightened. A gift and a silent vote of faith. That night, the squadron gathered in the hangar, prepping aircraft for routine patrols. Mechanics tightened bolts and checked instruments, their movements mechanical, practiced. Eleanor slipped between them. Like a shadow, her helmet visor reflecting the harsh lights. Captain Hayes, a young crew chief, stammered when he saw her approach her grounded Falcon. "You're not cleared. Consider this bird on loan," she cut in, her voice steady. "Top off the tanks." The crew chief froze, torn between protocol and awe. Everyone knew who she was. Everyone knew what she could do. After a moment, he nodded and signaled to his team. Fuel lines hissed. Lights flickered to life. The Falcon stirred awake under her touch. A sleeping predator ready to strike. But she wasn't alone. Half the squadron gathered near the hangar doors. Silent witnesses. Some looked nervous, others defiant. Donovan's orders were clear. Eleanor was not to fly. But in the unspoken code of pilots, they knew better. This was about more than orders. This was about survival, loyalty, and the creed they lived by. Leave no one behind. Collins stepped forward, helmet under his arm. "You're really going to do it, aren't you?" Eleanor met his eyes. "I don't have a choice," he smirked faintly. "That's what I thought. Just don't make me regret giving you that map." She almost smiled. "You won't." He pressed a gloved fist lightly against her shoulder, a gesture of solidarity. Then he stepped back, letting her pass. The hangar doors screeched open, revealing. The night sky stretched wide and endless above the desert. The engines roared louder, vibrating through her bones. Eleanor climbed into the cockpit, sliding the canopy shut with a sharp click. Her hands moved with practiced precision across the controls, flipping switches, checking gauges. It was muscle memory, as natural as breathing. Falcon 2-1. The tower's voice crackled over the comms, confused. "We don't have you on the flight schedule. Confirm status." Eleanor exhaled slowly, her hand hovering over the throttle. She knew the protocol. Unauthorized takeoff meant immediate reprimand, possibly even court-martial. But hesitation would cost lives. She pressed the transmit button. "Tower, This is Falcon 2-1. Mission override. Extraction run commencing. Negative 2-1. The voice barked. You are not cleared for takeoff. Repeat, you are grounded. She cut the channel. With a flick of her wrist, she pushed the throttle forward. The Falcon surged down the runway, engines screaming, the desert rushing past in a blur. Adrenaline surged through her veins, hot and electric, and then she was airborne. Back in the control room, Donovan stormed to the console. Who cleared her for takeoff? No one answered. On the main screen, Eleanor's jet appeared as a blip, streaking toward the horizon. Officers scrambled to re-establish comms, but Donovan knew it was useless. She had cut herself off deliberately. He slammed a fist on the table. Damn it, Hayes. But beneath his fury was something else, something he refused to admit aloud. A flicker of hope, because if anyone could do this, it was her. The night air was alive around her as Eleanor soared into the darkness. Below her, the desert stretched, like an endless ocean of sand and shadow. Ahead, the jagged outline of the canyon rose from the earth, a black maw waiting to swallow her whole. She dipped low, engines throttled back, hugging the terrain until the radar sweep couldn't touch her. The Falcon responded like an extension of her body, every curve and bank fluid. Instinctive. This is it, she whispered to herself, eyes fixed on the narrowing gorge ahead. No turning back now. The canyon walls loomed closer, hemming her in on both sides. One mistake, one hesitation, and she'd slam into rock at hundreds of miles per hour. But her hands were steady, her breathing even. This was where she belonged, not in an office, not on the ground, but here in the fire, balancing between risk and precision. And somewhere beyond the darkness, two generals were waiting. She pushed the throttle forward, the Falcon screaming through the canyon, invisible to radar, unstoppable in purpose, against orders, against reason, against fear, exactly where she was meant to be. The canyon swallowed her whole. Captain Eleanor Hayes felt the walls rise on either side like jagged teeth, their edges catching the glow of the moon. The Falcon's instruments blinked furiously. Warning of low altitude, high risk, collision danger. She ignored them all. Her eyes stayed locked on the narrow ribbon of sky above, her hands steady on the stick. Every nerve in her body was alive. The jet trembled with restrained power. The engines hungry for open air, but she kept it pinned low, hugging the terrain. Radar beams swept the desert above, searching, hunting, but down here in the shadows, she was invisible. A voice crackled faintly over her secondary channel, rough and static-filled. Hayes, is that you? Her chest tightened. It was General Ruiz. She flicked the switch. Copy, General. I'm inbound. Hang tight. Thought command said you were grounded, Ruiz said, half a laugh, half disbelief. They did, Eleanor answered, banking hard around a cliff bend. The canyon narrowed, and she felt the Falcon's wingtip brush the edge of darkness. But you asked for me, so here I am. Static swallowed his reply, but the gratitude in his tone was clear even through the distortion. She pushed deeper into the canyon, her eyes scanning the HUD, every movement precise. The Falcon darted like a hawk through twisting stone corridors. The sound of rushing wind echoed inside the cockpit, mixing with the rising pitch of the engine's dot, and then an alarm screamed. Eleanor glanced at the radar. Blips appeared above her, circling. Enemy fighters. They had detected something, maybe a trace of her engine heat, maybe the faint echo of her passage. Either way, they were converging. She cursed under her breath. Of course they'd have company. Pulling the throttle, she dove deeper into the canyon, the jet skimming dangerously close to the riverbed at the bottom. The HUD flashed red warnings, collision imminent. Terrain proximity Stall risk. Eleanor silenced them with a flick of her finger. You don't get to tell me what's reckless. She muttered. The enemy fighters swooped overhead, searchlights piercing the night. Eleanor killed her external lights, plunging into near total darkness. Her eyes strained, reading shadows, trusting instincts. One spotlight swept dangerously close, illuminating the canyon walls just feet from her wing. She rolled hard, banking, into a tight crevice where the canyon split. The falcon scraped so close she could almost feel the stone brushing against her canopy. The searchlight passed. The fighters moved on, convinced nothing could survive down here. Eleanor allowed herself one sharp breath of relief. Still alive. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The canyon twisted and turned, every bend another gamble. She flew low, silent, predatory, until at last a faint distress beacon pinged on her HUD. She had found them. General Ruiz, General Aldridge, confirm your location, she transmitted. Ruiz's voice came through again, clearer this time. We're near Sector Delta 7, old mining outpost. Signal flare ready. Copy, Eleanor said. Prepare for extraction. Her eyes swept the terrain ahead, and there it was, a faint orange glow against the canyon floor. A flare, burning, bright in the darkness. Next to it, two tiny figures waved frantically. Her stomach clenched. She had to land, but the canyon floor was uneven, jagged with rock and debris. No runway. No chance of a traditional landing. She exhaled, steadying herself. This is why they asked for you. Circling once, Eleanor lined up her approach. She cut the throttle, letting the falcon descend in a controlled glide. The nose dipped, the ground rushing up at terrifying speed. Her hands danced over the stick, adjusting angle, compensating for every gust of canyon wind. Come on, come on. The wheels hit dirt with a bone-rattling jolt. The falcon skidded, bouncing, metal screaming against stone. Sparks erupted from the undercarriage. Eleanor wrestled the stick, fighting to keep control as the canyon walls loomed ahead. At the last possible second, she yanked hard. The jet screeched to a halt, dust billowing in clouds around it. Her heart hammered. She was alive. The falcon was battered, but intact, and the generals were running toward her. She popped the canopy. Get in! She shouted. Ruiz scrambled up first. Aldridge closed behind. Both men were covered in dust and sweat, faces grim, but eyes burning with relief. They squeezed into the rear compartment, strapping themselves in with frantic hands. Didn't think anyone would be crazy enough to try this, Aldridge said, breathless. Eleanor smirked. Lucky for you. Crazy is my specialty. No time to waste. She throttled up, engines roaring back to life. The falcon lurched forward, bouncing along the uneven canyon floor. Eleanor's eyes locked on the narrowing gap ahead, the last stretch. A flat ground before solid rock rose like a wall. Come on, baby, she whispered to the jet. One more miracle. The nose lifted. The engine screamed. The falcon surged upward, dust exploding beneath its wings. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought they wouldn't make it. The wall loomed closer, and then they were airborne. Climbing steeply out of the canyon. The generals whooped in the back, clutching their harnesses. Eleanor grinned, adrenaline flooding her veins. Extraction complete. But the celebration was short-lived. The radar lit up again, enemy fighters inbound, closing fast. They must have picked up the falcon's heat signature on takeoff. Ruiz leaned forward, shouting over the roar. We can't outrun them. Eleanor's smile turned sharp. Who said anything about outrunning? She yanked the stick, rolling the falcon into a dizzying corkscrew. The generals cursed in surprise. As the jet flipped on its axis, diving straight back into the canyon. Enemy missiles streaked past overhead, missing by inches. Hold on, Eleanor called. This ride's just getting started. The Falcon became a blur, darting through stone. Mazes, twisting, turning, each maneuver tighter than the last. Enemy fighters pursued, but they couldn't match her instincts. Where they hesitated, she committed. Where they faltered, she soared. One fighter clipped a canyon wall and erupted in a fireball. Another lost her trail entirely, overshooting into open desert. Only one remained, stubborn, skilled, locked onto her tail. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. All right, let's dance. She dove toward the riverbed, engines screaming. The enemy followed, closing in, missile lock beeping in her ears. At the last second, she pulled a maneuver so sharp the Falcon nearly stalled, flipping vertical along the canyon wall. The missile fired. It tracked heat, streaking after her, but caught the enemy fighter instead. The explosion lit up the canyon, shockwaves rattling the Falcon, but leaving her intact. Silence followed. No more pursuers, no more alarms. Just the steady hum of her engines and the ragged breathing of the generals behind her. She leveled out, climbing higher, the desert stretching below. Safe for now. Highs, Ruiz said finally, his voice low, awed. That was extraordinary. Eleanor allowed herself a thin smile, eyes fixed on the horizon. Just another day at the office. Aldrich laughed, shaking his head. You'll never hear the end of this, you know. They'll write it into the books. Maybe, she thought. Or maybe they'd court-martial her the moment she landed. Either way, it didn't matter. She had done what needed to be done. And in that moment, soaring free above the desert night, Eleanor Hayes felt something she hadn't in months. Not fear. Not doubt. Belonging. The desert horizon stretched wide and endless, painted silver by the moon. Captain Eleanor Hayes kept the Falcon steady, engines humming low as she angled west. The battered jet carried more than just its own scars now. It carried two of the highest-ranking officers in the United States Air Force, strapped in behind her. Silent and shaken. Her hands tightened on the controls. Rescue was only half the battle. Now came the harder part. Getting out alive. Status check. General Ruiz said, his voice rough but steady. Eleanor glanced at her instrument panel. Half the warning lights glowed amber. The landing gear had jammed during her canyon skid, hydraulic. Pressure was low, and the fuel gauge dipped lower with every passing minute. She didn't bother sugarcoating it. Falcons holding together, she said, but she won't fly forever. We're heavy, fuel is tight, and every hostile within. 200 miles now knows we're airborne. General Aldrich leaned forward, peering over her shoulder. How far to base? Too far, Eleanor admitted. Not without company showing up. The radio crackled, sudden and sharp. Enemy chatter, scrambled but unmistakable. Eleanor adjusted. Her frequency, filtering the noise. Dozens of voices barked in rapid exchange. Search teams. Fighter wings. Ground radar triangulating her position. They're coming, she muttered. General Ruiz exhaled slowly. How many? Enough to make this interesting. Minutes later, her radar confirmed it. A cluster of blips appeared to the east fast. Movers. Fighters. They're vectoring to cut us off, Eleanor said, banking sharply to the north. We won't make it straight home. We'll have to improvise. Improvise? Aldridge repeated, incredulous. Eleanor grinned despite herself. You'll see. She dipped the Falcon low again, skimming the desert floor so close the dust kicked up in her wake. Flying low burned more fuel, but it bought her invisibility. Enemy radar swept overhead, missing her by inches. In the cockpit, silence pressed. Heavy. Ruiz and Aldridge clung to their harnesses as the Falcon twisted and banked through jagged desert ridges. Eleanor's focus was absolute, every reflex sharpened by adrenaline. But she knew they couldn't hide forever. The first missiles. came without warning. A shrill tone screamed through her headset. Eleanor jerked hard left, pulling the Falcon into a brutal roll. A streak of fire shot past, detonating in the dunes below. The shockwave rattled the cockpit. "Missile lock! Hang on!" She barked. She dumped countermeasures, flares bursting. Bright against the night sky. Another missile veered off, tricked by the sudden blaze. But the third stayed locked, tailing her heat signature. Her jaw clenched. Persistent little bastard. She yanked the stick, diving into a canyon gorge so tight the walls blurred past in streaks. The missile followed, closing the distance. Ruiz swore in the back, clinging white-knuckled to his seat. At the last second, Eleanor cut throttle and rolled sideways, slipping between two jagged outcroppings. The missile slammed into stone, exploding in a shower of fire and rock. The Falcon shuddered from the shock, but kept flying. Ruiz let out a ragged breath. "You're insane," Eleanor smirked. "That's one word for it." But the fight wasn't over. Enemy fighters swept in overhead, searchlights slicing through the canyon darkness. The Falcon was fast, agile but wounded. Eleanor knew she couldn't outrun them forever. Her eyes flicked to the fuel gauge again. The needle hovered dangerously close to empty. "Options are running out," she muttered. Aldridge leaned forward, desperate. "Is there anywhere you can land?" She thought fast. Maps flashed through her memory. Old forward operating bases, abandoned strips left behind after earlier campaigns. One in particular stood out, a derelict airstrip carved into the desert, long unused, but just within range if she squeezed every drop of fuel. "I've got one," she said. "It won't be pretty, but it'll keep us alive." The chase stretched on, minute after brutal minute. Eleanor pushed the Falcon harder than she ever had, weaving through ridges, diving low, climbing high, always one step ahead of enemy lock-ons. Every evasive maneuver drained more fuel. Every dodge burned away her margin for safety. By the time the old airstrip came into view, her warning lights screamed at her from the dashboard. "Fuel critical. Engines running hot. Buckle in," she ordered. "This is going to be rough." The strip was barely visible, cracked concrete half buried in sand. It looked more like a graveyard than a runway. But it was their only chance. She angled the Falcon in, lowering speed, extending the jammed landing gear with a manual override. The jet groaned in protest. Behind her, Ruiz whispered a prayer. The Falcon hit dirt hard. Metal screeched. Sparks flew. The battered jet skidded across broken concrete, bouncing, sliding sideways. For a heartbeat, Eleanor thought they'd flip, the world tilting sickeningly, and then, with a final shriek, the Falcon ground to a halt. Silence. Dust swirled. In the moonlight around the motionless jet, they were down. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Ruiz laughed, breathless and disbelieving. "I'll be damned. You actually did it." Eleanor powered down the engines, her hands trembling faintly now that the adrenaline eased. "We're not safe yet," she warned. "If they tracked. US here. We'll have company soon." Aldridge peered out at the empty desert. "Then what? We can't take off again in this wreck." Eleanor nodded. The Falcon was done. Its undercarriage was mangled, one wing trailing smoke. She had pushed it past its limits, but she had also bought them something priceless. "Time. We send a signal," she said firmly. "Emergency beacon. If our guys are listening, they'll come. And if they're not?" Ruiz asked. Eleanor met his eyes in the rear mirror. Her voice was steel. "Then we make our stand here." They moved quickly. Eleanor retrieved the emergency transmitter, setting it on a cracked slab of runway. A beacon pulsed to life, sending a coded SOS into the night sky. Minutes ticked by. In the distance, faint rumbling echoed engines. Enemy patrols closing in. Ruiz checked his sidearm, loading a fresh magazine. Aldridge did the same. Eleanor strapped her own pistol to her thigh, her jaw tight. The three of them stood in the shadow of the crippled falcon, waiting, listening as the enemy drew closer. The night was alive with tension. Every crunch of gravel, every whisper of wind carried the weight of coming battle. And then, faint at first, then growing louder, a different sound split the air. Rotors. Helicopters. But not enemy. The beacon had worked. Dark silhouettes appeared. Against the horizon, Black Hawks, their blades chopping through the night. Relief surged through Eleanor's chest, fierce and overwhelming. "We're not done yet," she whispered. Enemy trucks crested a ridge just as the Black Hawks descended. Spotlights flared, weapons raised. Eleanor dove behind cover, firing bursts into the night. Ruiz and Aldridge returned fire, holding the line as the rescue team rappelled down from the hovering choppers. Bullets tore across the cracked runway. Dust exploded in violent bursts. Eleanor felt the sting of debris cut across her cheek, but she didn't stop firing. Not this close. Then, one by one, the enemy guns went silent under the Black Hawks' covering fire. Trucks burned on the ridge. The night fell quiet again, save for the steady thrum of rotor blades. A soldier grabbed Eleanor's arm, pulling her toward the waiting helicopter. "Time to go, Captain." She turned once, glancing back at the Falcon, scarred, broken. A piece of her soul left in twisted steel. Then she climbed aboard, Ruiz and Aldridge behind her. As the Black Hawk lifted off, carrying them away from the broken airstrip, Eleanor let herself truly breathe, for the first time since she had taken off against orders. They were alive. Against the odds, against reason, they had escaped, but deep inside, she knew the battle wasn't over, because now she had to face the consequences. The Black Hawk's rotors thundered overhead as dawn bled into the horizon, painting the desert sky in shades of gold and crimson. Eleanor sat wedged between General Ruiz and General Aldridge, the rush of wind whipping through the open cabin. Every muscle in her body ached, her flight suit streaked with dust and blood. She closed her eyes just for a moment, letting this vibration of the helicopter's frame lull her into an exhausted calm. But her mind never rested. She knew what awaited her. Rescue was victory. Yes, but defying orders was treason to the chain of command. Hours later, the convoy touched down at a forward operating base. Soldiers rushed forward, medics taking the generals for examination. Cameras snapped. Reporters tried to push past military police, hungry for the story of two generals rescued against all odds. And Eleanor? She stepped off the helicopter into silence. Her boots crunched against the tarmac as she walked alone, helmet tucked under her arm. Soldiers lined the runway, watching her pass. Some nodded in respect. Others whispered, eyes wide, as if unsure whether to salute or keep their distance. Kept her gaze forward. Her war wasn't over yet. The first debrief lasted 3 hours. A half-circle of senior officers, clipped voices, sharp questions. Eleanor sat ramrod straight, answering each with calm precision. Yes, I took the Falcon without authorization. Yes, I knowingly disobeyed standing orders. Yes, I engaged enemy forces without sanction. Yes, I succeeded in rescuing Generals Ruiz and Aldridge. The final statement hung in the air, daring them to contradict her. One colonel leaned forward, his tone icy. "Captain Hayes, do you have any idea what you've done? You risked not only your life, but the lives of two of the highest ranking officers in the U.S. Air Force. You gambled everything on reckless instinct." Eleanor met his gaze. Her voice was steady. "With respect, sir, I didn't gamble. I calculated, and I won." Silence. Later, in the barracks, she sat alone on the edge of her bunk. Her helmet rested on the floor, a jagged crack down its side from the canyon crash. She traced the fracture with her finger, thinking of how close it had all been. She should have felt relief, triumph, something. Instead, a gnawing unease filled her chest. Would they strip her wings for good? Court-martial her? Lock her away as an example to others? A knock interrupted her thoughts. The door opened, and in walked General Ruiz, leaning on a cane, his arm still bandaged. Aldrich followed, stiff-backed but steady. "Captain Hayes," Ruiz said, his gravelly voice carrying a weight that silenced the room. "On your feet." Eleanor rose. Her pulse quickened. Ruiz studied her for a long moment. Then, to her astonishment, he saluted. "Ma'am?" Eleanor stammered. Ruiz's lips quirked. "You heard me. You saved our lives. That deserves recognition, not reprimand." Aldrich nodded, his usual sternness softened. "We told the board everything. What you did wasn't reckless. It was necessary. Regulations don't save lives. Pilots do. You proved that." Eleanor's throat tightened. For months she had carried the weight of her grounding like a scarlet letter, a mark of failure. 2. Hear the generals themselves defend her. No, honor her was something she hadn't dared imagine. Ruiz lowered his salute. "The brass won't forgive easily, but they'll listen to us. And as long as I have a star on my shoulder, I'll make damn sure your wings stay right where they belong." Days turned into weeks. The inquiry dragged on, endless paperwork and testimony. Every second of Eleanor's mission dissected by officers who had never once flown through enemy fire. She endured it all in silence, in memory of the general's salute, a shield against the storm. Finally, the verdict came. Eleanor stood before the review board in full dress uniform, the room packed with senior officers, aides, and reporters. The presiding general cleared his throat. "Captain Eleanor Hayes," he began, "this board recognizes that you knowingly disobeyed direct orders, commandeered Air Force equipment, and conducted unauthorized combat operations." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Eleanor's chest tightened. The general's voice hardened. Ordinarily, such actions would result in immediate dismissal from service, if not criminal charges. He paused, letting the weight of those words hang. Then his tone shifted. "However, this board also recognizes that your actions directly resulted in the safe recovery of Generals Ruiz and Aldrich, prevented the loss of strategic intelligence, and demonstrated exceptional skill and bravery under fire. Both generals have recommended you for commendation." Another murmur, sharper this time. Eleanor's pulse raced. The general's eyes locked on hers. "Accordingly, this board has decided not only to restore your flight status, but to award you the Distinguished Flying Cross." Gasps echoed. Eleanor blinked, momentarily stunned. Her wings, her life, or hers again. Reporters swarmed her as she left the chamber, shouting questions, cameras flashing. "Captain Hayes, how does it feel? Do you regret disobeying orders? What's next for you?" Eleanor gave no speeches, no grand declarations. She simply adjusted the polished wings on her uniform and said, "I'll be flying," because that was all she had ever wanted, all she had ever been. That night, back in her quarters, she sat by the window watching the sunset. The sky was streaked in shades of fire, the horizon endless. Somewhere out there, another mission waited. Another risk. Her phone buzzed a new set of orders. She smiled faintly, recognizing the familiar thrill. There would always be danger. Always doubters. Always rules written by those too afraid to bend them. But Eleanor Hayes had proved something to herself and to the world, that sometimes the sky belonged not to the cautious, but to the bold. She picked up her helmet, the crack still etched across its surface, a reminder of the night she chose to fly when no one else would, and with steady hands, she whispered to the empty room, "Let's dance again." In the years to come, the story of Captain Eleanor Hayes would become legend. Cadets would whisper it in flight schools. Instructors would use it as a cautionary tale or as inspiration. To some, she was reckless. To others, she was a hero. To Eleanor, she was simply a pilot who had been grounded for flying too close to the edge, until the edge was the only place left to save the lives that mattered most. And when the sky finally called her name again, she answered without hesitation, because that was who she was, who she would always be.